In this video, we're going to take this image and turn it into this. Hi, my name is Mitch Boyer. I run a print shop called Nice Art Prints. And I make videos where I print images that you send in to me. In this video, we're printing a beautiful photograph made by Jake Wagner. When you're printing, it can be really difficult to get bright colors like this image has, so it's the perfect image to talk about that. This photograph is part of a bigger series called Alone Together. You can check out the full series on Jake's website. I've left a link below. You'll notice that he's about to publish his second book next month in March. I spent the last week or so talking with Jake about this image. He's a really cool person and a fantastic artist, so I definitely recommend checking that out. Check out his Instagram. Again, links to all those goodies in the description. And while you're down there in the description, you know what to do. Please like and subscribe. That stuff really does help to promote the channel to more viewers. Now, let's talk about printing, because that's what I love to do. And I assume that's why you're watching this video. I want to talk about what printing actually means. I think in this digital era that we live in, printing can seem like, oh, you just, you hit Command P and it sends a file to this machine, it drops some ink on some paper and you're done. Bada bing, bada boom. But if you think about the history of photographic printing, we go back to the darkroom, and printing is a much larger thing. A real quick basic primer. In the darkroom, you have your film, right? You take a light, shine that light through a film onto a photosensitive piece of paper, and then that light exposes the image onto the paper, boom, it prints an image. But even that definition of printing is too simplistic, because you have to define how long is that light going to be on? What chemicals are you going to be treating your paper with? All that stuff's going to affect the exposure of the image, the contrast, the colors that you get in the final print. In the darkroom, you were confronted with all of these decisions you had to make. It's tempting in the digital era to be like, okay, just hit Command P. And sometimes when you send your images off to a larger print lab, that is what happens. They just don't have the time and the ability, because they're printing so many things, to treat your image with maybe the same care that a darkroom lab would have. But I don't want to be like that. For me, I want to treat printing with the same respect that it required in the darkroom. If you find that kind of interesting, I have another video called Dodge and Burn Like Ansel Adams, where I talk a little more about the similarities between Photoshop and working in the darkroom. Printing, in my opinion, begins in Photoshop and then extends after you prepare the file into this machine, which we call a printer, and on and on and on. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop with Jake's image. Before I do anything to an image, I want to make sure I spend some time with it and understand it. Maintaining the artistic integrity of the image going to the print is very, very important. So if we look at this, a couple of the things that I noticed right off the bat is Jake's image here has these beautiful, deliberate imperfections. Jake told me he shot this on Lomography 100. It's a 35 millimeter film. Surprisingly grainy for a 100 speed film, but also very saturated. It's got these beautiful colors. I mean, look at this neon blue, this fuchsia, the reds and the oranges. Even the blacks here, if I grab the color picker up and look, these blacks are pretty saturated. Very saturated blacks, and then you've got these kind of light leaks. Jake told me that when he's developing his film, he deliberately is rough with it to give it these imperfections. There's these kind of almost light leaks coming from the sprocket holes in the film. I personally think one of the things that makes this image so beautiful is the humanity found in the imperfections. While other images that I may be preparing for print, I may do things like clean up the grain, the scratches, or the dust on there. I definitely do not want to do that with Jake's print. But what I do want to do is, and what I'm noticing is, there's these very bright saturated colors, which, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, printing bright saturated colors is actually extremely difficult to do. We're going to nerd out in just a second, and we're going to talk about the physical, as in the physics behind light and why it's so difficult to replicate these bright colors you see on screen onto a print. But for now, I'm just kind of reviewing the image and flagging things that I think are important as I'm going to be preparing it. A few other things I might do as I'm looking at it, I'm going to check out the image size. At a resolution of 300 pixels per inch, I can see that this image is 9.75 inches by 15.21 inches. I think I want to like double this in size, so that's something to consider. And then last thing I'm just going to check, and I'm going to see, okay, it's a 16-bit image, which is good for these bright colors. And then I'm going to look down, check what profile we're at. We're at Adobe RGB 1998, which is actually really good for reds. And that's kind of my initial review of the image. I go over details in the image, and then I'll look at more of the technical specs. All right, let's nerd out a little bit on color. So I've already mentioned this again in the video, but why is it so hard to print bright colors? Well, it really comes down to the difference between additive colors and subtractive colors. Additive colors start with a base of darkness. So additive colors start at black, and then as you add colors into the image, it gets brighter and brighter and brighter until it's white. Subtractive color goes the other way. Subtractive color starts at white, and then as you add colors, it gets darker and darker and darker until you go all the way down to black. These two methods of creating colors are used every day, and we see them every day. Additive colors are used by your computer screen, by your phone screen, by your TV. Anytime there's an object that's shooting light into your eyes, that's additive color. Subtractive color is used by prints, the paint on your walls, the paint that you mixed as a kid in school. That's all subtractive color. Let's jump into Photoshop again, and I'm going to show you a little more concrete example of how this stuff actually works. So first up, let's talk about additive color. Additive color, again, as I mentioned, comes from your computer screens or your phone or your TV. And usually they use 3 colors to create all the other colors: red, green, and blue. That's why when you hear, oh, that's an RGB screen, that's what they're talking about. For example, in an LED screen, those little light emitting diodes are shooting out either red or green or blue. And as they mix together, they create all the other colors, like this. If you take red and you add it to green, you get yellow. Pretty cool. If you take blue and add it to red, you get magenta. If you add it to green, you get cyan. And if you add all 3 of those together, you get white. Subtractive color, as I mentioned, is what you see in prints, what you see in paintings. We see a ton of subtractive color everywhere. In traditional printing, there are 4 colors that are used in the subtractive process to create all the other colors. And those colors are cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. You may have heard them referred to as CMYK. The black is K because if they use B, it would be confusing with blue. So they use the K at the end. Fun little fact. So let's see what happens when we mix these colors. If you take cyan and you mix it with magenta, you get blue. If you take yellow and mix it with cyan, you get green. If you mix it with magenta, you get red. And if you mix all 3, you get black. Now, you may be wondering, wait, why is there a black there? If they all make black, like, why do you need the black? It's purely economical. If you're making tons of prints, you don't want to use all 3 of your inks just to create black, because black is printed all the time. So most printers add an extra ink as black to help reduce the workload on those other inks. Now you may be saying, wait a second, Mitch, you just told me that subtractive colors can't make bright colors, but I just watched you make all these different colors with the subtractive process. And you're right, I did make all those colors. And in fact, if we pull them up and count the colors, you'll see that the same colors, or the same number of colors, that was close, I almost messed up there. The same number of colors were created in both. Let's look at these. In RGB, we have blue, cyan, green, yellow, red, and magenta, black, and white. And in CMYK, yellow, red, magenta, blue, cyan, green, black, and white. But if I zoom in on the green here in the RGB, and I zoom in on the green here at the CMYK, you'll notice something. Those are 2 very different shades of green. Let's look at these other colors. Check out the cyan. Look at that. Those are even more different. And even some of the others, the red, which if you compare the 2 reds, you look at it and to the naked eye, it may not seem that different. So let's grab the color picker and let's see what's going on here. So if we look over here, we got a hue value of 358 degrees, saturation's 100%, brightness is 100%. It's all the way up in the top right. And then we go over here to CMYK, we do the same thing, color picker. We look at that red, oh, look, the brightness is only 93%. So those are actually two different reds, and the CMYK one, the print red, is a little less bright. Now we can see there's actual differences just between the way that a screen mixes colors and the way that a printer makes colors, but the printer makes darker colors. Now, you may be a step ahead of me and be thinking, well, that doesn't really matter, Mitch. I'm just gonna convert my RGB image into a CMYK image, and it's gonna keep it nice and bright. We're gonna run into a little trouble there, and let me show you what's gonna happen. So here we have the RGB image, and up in the view menu, we can actually do what's called a soft proof, and we can see what it will look like if we convert it and print it with CMYK. Proof setup, I make sure it's set to working CMYK, and then down here you see I can change proof colors. And now, oh my goodness, look what it did to our beautiful saturated bright colors. It just killed them, just sucked the life out of them. If I flip it on and off, you can see we go from nice, bright, vibrant colors down to these like desaturated, messy colors. What happened? Part of it is the algorithm that Photoshop used to convert those colors. But the other part of it is a real physical limitation. Remember how I said additive colors are what you see on your screens, like your phones and your computers, and then subtractive colors are on prints. Let's think about that for a second. When you're looking at your computer screen, there's literal light shooting out into your eyes. When you're looking at a print, light is being bounced off this print back at your eyes. Think of it like a light source. If you have a strobe that's pointed directly at your subject, that's going to be much brighter than if you bounce that strobe off a wall or a bounce card or through a softbox. This is a direct light source, and this is a reflective light source. So the brightest that this image ever can be is the white of the paper. With the CMYK printing process, in order to get those secondary subtractive colors like green and red, we have to add multiple colors together. So if you start with white, and then you add magenta, and you add yellow, so you get red, this is as bright of a red as you can get. So even if you wanted like a 98% bright red, you physically cannot get it. So frustrating, right? So how do we fix that? How do we get around that limitation? Or are we just doomed to dull prints forever? Well, there's a few things you can do. Actually, 3 things. The first is alluded to in the idea of CMYK. If in order to get red, we have to mix 2 colors and those colors drop you down a couple brightness levels, what if you had an extra ink that was just red? Boom. What if your printer didn't have 4 inks? But had 11 inks? There's actually 12 slots here, but one of those is not an ink, it's a chroma optimizer. We don't need to talk about that today. This printer, one of the reasons why I picked this printer is that there are actually 12 inks. There's actually a red ink that I can use when I'm printing pictures with red so that those reds can be nice and bright. So if I want to pump these reds up, guess what? This is the right printer for the job. I know I talk Canon up a lot of times. I really do love this printer. I will say Epson also has really good printers that use 8 inks. So it's not just a Canon thing. Both like major players and HP also, all the major players have recognized that like, oh, 4 colors are they're just not enough in most cases for fine art inkjet printing. What else can we do? Well, if the brightest level that you can possibly get is the white, what if you got a brighter paper? That's so smart. Good job. Look at you. It's true. If we get a brighter paper, then your starting point is even higher. The other thing with paper that you want to pay attention to is what kind of coating the paper has. So this picture behind me was printed on Hahnemühle Photorag matte. It works really well for images like this where the colors are not super saturated. The colors are kind of like mellow. They're around the like 30 to 40% saturated rate. Working with an image like this, it might not work as well. With a matte paper, that ink is going to drop in and it's just going to soak on through. You actually have to use more ink on a matte paper to achieve the same level of saturation that you do on something like a semi-gloss paper like this Baryta. Baryta paper is a layered paper. On the base, you have a cotton rag fiber. On top of that, you have barium sulfate, or if you totes want to shorten it, Baryta. Barium sulfate is a white, chalky compound, and that is put over the paper. That actually raises the level of the paper. Now, it's not an optical brightener, which is important for longevity, but it is brighter than the cotton rag is, so it lifts the brightness of the paper. It's also insoluble. So ink, which is like us, mostly water, when it goes onto the paper and hits the barium sulfate, it's not going to seep into it. It's going to sit on top of it like a water droplet sits on top of your phone screen when it's raining. It's going to stay brighter. That's why a lot of semi-gloss papers, whether they're Baryta or like an RC paper or a sateen, those are going to be brighter in general than a matte paper. There's a third thing you can do to make sure that your bright, saturated images come out beautiful in print. And that has to do with what I was talking about at the beginning of this video. Printing is not just hitting Control P, but just like in the darkroom, you had to confront these decisions. Well, we confronted the decision of what printer to use. We confronted the decision of what paper to use. Now we need to confront how do we prepare the file in Photoshop before printing it. And there's a few important decisions we have to make in order to do that. So before I started recording this video, I made this test print. I'm a huge proponent of test prints. I don't like just going straight to the final print because even with a calibrated monitor, you don't know exactly what you're going to get. You are converting, again, from an additive color process to a subtractive color process whenever you go from a screen to print. And no matter how calibrated your screen is, there's just going to be differences. So when I did a straight print, it came out pretty good. I mean, you got to hand it to the Canon printer again. It does well with reds. And at first glance, this seems pretty faithful to the digital image. But I've spent some more time with it. And a few things that I noticed looking at this image, it gets really muddy up here. If you look in the digital image, there's a lot more going on. The greens here actually turn pretty blue, whereas in the digital image, they're fairly green. So that's one thing to fix. Looking here at the reds are kind of orange actually compared to the reds in the picture. This like neon blue and the fuchsia, they're actually holding up really well, which is impressive. And the overall brightness of the image, I think, is good. So I'm not so concerned about changing the brightness of the image as a whole, but maybe I'm going to be lifting the greens a little bit. I'm definitely going to be messing with the reds. Again, they're like a little too orange, so I'll be adjusting the magenta level there. As a caveat, normally at this point, I'm working on my calibrated monitor. For the purposes of this video, I'm working off my MacBook. This is not what I recommend. Off camera, I am going to be checking on there and making sure that it all lines up. But it's kind of a pain to break down the set and set up over there. So the magic of cinema is going, this is going to work. Okay. So I'm in here and I'm going to look at the histogram first. So I open this up and I'm actually going to go to an all channels view, and that's going to give me a view on each level. Now remember my little checklist in the test print. This has a lot more cyan in it. I'm going to create a curves layer and I'm going to change the mode to color. So that's only going to affect the color. It's not going to affect the luminosity because again, I'm good with the luminosity, how bright the overall image is. But what I'm not okay with is some of the saturation in here. So I'm just going to label this color and off we go. So up here, I want there to be a little more green. And I know I'm looking at the histogram here, and you can see in the green channel, there's no information down here. So if I lift the greens a bit and I kind of pull that histogram and see, let's do before and after, we go from no greens to a lot of greens. That's definitely too far, but I just wanted to show you kind of what's happening. So I'm gonna pull it to the point where it's barely perceptible. I'm gonna go here to the middle, hold down Shift and click. Now I know I have this anchor point. And now when I pull, I don't have to worry about affecting all these values below. All right, yeah, there's just maybe a little bit more. just a tad more green up there. You can be as OCD about this as you want to be. If you're like me, you're going to be pretty OCD about this. When you're putting your pictures up on Instagram or on your website, you can't control anybody else's screen. You can't control whether the screen is warm or cold or bright or dim, calibrated, not calibrated. You just kind of have to let your image go and just trust that people will like it. But when it comes to print, you can be OCD. You can dial it in the way you like it. And in my opinion, you should. Anyways, so I may adjust this again later. We'll see. The next thing I'm going to do is, remember, I wanted some more reds because this is looking a little more orange on the top here. All right, so I've got this point in the middle, and now you can use this little hand tool, and you can grab any point of the image. So here I've made a little extra contrast to the red. Just a tad. Now I've lost some of the red on the side, so I want to bring that back. Cool. I'm looking at a couple things while I'm flipping back and forth. I'm looking at the actual image, and I'm also looking at the histogram. Here's the original. I'm looking right here at the red channel. So new one, original, new, original. So you can see this little spike here. This is that part of the face that we've adjusted. So it's a little lower. I popped it up. Here at the blue channel, this is off and this is on. You can see I've softened the blues, and I don't want to do that because the blues were the one thing that looked really good on here. In order to protect those blues, I'm going to highlight them and mask them out so they're not affected by this curve layer. So let's turn off the curve layer, click the background, go up here to select, and we're going to do color range, and I'm going to select these blues. None here so I can see. Okay. And then up here in the eyes, and we're going to make it nice and fuzzy so we don't see the mask. Cool. All right. Now here on the mask layer, I mask that out. Now when we turn it on and off, you can see up here the blue channel is not really affected. There's a little bit of change down in the low end, but my suspicion is yeah, look, that's this little area here, which those I wanted to be more green. So that's okay. Cool. I'm just going to make sure the mask looks good. I'm not going to duplicate it. Zoom around on this. Cool. In this case, I don't want the mask to be blurry. I want to make sure that this grain is around, because otherwise that could really mess things up. So using the curves layer set to a blending mode of color is one way that you can adjust the color in your images to make sure that they're more faithful to what you see on your screen. An important thing to note here is that I had this test print first. You don't want to just go blind and assume things like, oh, I need more green, I need more red. Do a test print first and then go adjust things. So now that we've got this, we can make another test print, and then we can see if we like those changes or if we want to roll some of those changes back. Interesting. I think the colors in the latest version are a lot more true to the actual print. I do think the black point compensation that I used to kind of lift the blacks, I think it went a little too far. So I'll probably go back and I will manually adjust the luminosity rather than trusting the printing program to adjust it automatically. But the colors here are much more in line with the colors that I'm seeing on the calibrated screen. There's a few more like little tweaks. I'm going to do another round of test prints and then I'll print the final. Rather than boring you with every single little tweak, let's roll that printing montage. that's it for this video. Thanks again to Jake Winkner for letting me print your beautiful photograph. I'm gonna be sending that off soon. Please remember to check out Jake's stuff in the links below. He's got a book coming out featuring this image and a bunch of other images. The series is called Alone Together. Follow him on Instagram. While you're there, if you haven't already, like and subscribe. Again, that really helps promote this channel. I'm Mitch Boyer. This is Night Art. What? Oh, I was so close to just nailing that one. This is Nice Art Prints. I'll see you around.